Welcome once again to Along the Rio Grande. I'm George Torok, and today we're on the 10th floor of the Cortez Building, a beautiful landmark on San Jacinto Plaza in downtown El Paso. And we're at the El Paso Community Foundation. And joining us today is Roman Herrington, a program officer with the foundation. Roman, welcome to Along the Rio Grande.
Oh, thank you so much. It's our pleasure to not only be here this morning, but also be able to host you today in our beautiful offices.
Great. We're going to learn a little bit about the Plaza Theater project today, something that the El Paso Community Foundation has been very active in the last few years. Maybe we can start out by explaining what the Community Foundation is.
Sure. The Community Foundation is really a national concept. It was originated about 80 years ago and was based on the concept of trying to be able to establish community philanthropy for individuals. Here specifically in El Paso, 25 years ago, the foundation was established because when people were passing away or when people were made charitable gifts, those gifts were leaving El Paso. And so they wanted to find a way that they could centralize in one area to be able to keep those charitable gifts here in this area, to be able to do really good things for this community rather than necessarily helping support the work of other charitable organizations outside of this region. So really since that time, the foundation has been able to grow to about $100 million in assets and will help support all kinds of charitable programs within this community, probably granting about close to $4 million a year.
Wow. What kinds of projects? What are some examples?
Sure. All kinds of things. Really, most notably through our grant-making program, we're able to really help facilitate individual giving to help support projects like the La Fe Clinic, being able to help expand their immunization program at La Fe, being able to help support underwriting of productions for the El Paso Symphony, being able to work and partner with the state of Texas on the restoration of the Weiler Tramway, which was a large gift by Glenn and Carl Weiler a number of years ago. And Mr. Weiler had always wanted to be able to see how the tramway could be reopened and made available for the community to be able to enjoy and experience once again.
This was something that was given to the foundation?
Exactly. When Mr. Weiler died about 10 years ago, he left in his estate a gift to the Community Foundation that included KTSM and all of its related properties. And about 4 or 5 years ago, the foundation was able to sell those properties to fully endow the Glenn and Carl Weiler Fund for General Charitable Purposes. But in that process, the tramway was taken out of the sale so that we could then partner with the state, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, to be able to then jointly work towards restoring the tramway, really in loving memory of Glenn and Carl Weiler.
So we're involved in quite a variety of activities. Some of them social services, provide different things to the community. Also we have things that deal with culture and history. The designation of a Pass of the North Heritage Corridor ties into all of that as well. What's your background? How did you come to the foundation?
I grew up in Costa Rica, overseas. Lived there for about 15 years and came here to El Paso a little over 10 years ago, really as a student at UTEP, and fell in love with El Paso. It had the same mountains that you would find in Costa Rica. It's not as green as it was in Costa Rica, as lush and tropical. But have stayed here ever since. Have been working now at the foundation for a little over 7 years now. Working on a lot of projects really related to looking at the question of affordable housing and how can the foundation play a role in being able to help support the work of organizations that are building affordable housing, to then working on a major initiative where we partnered with the state of Texas, looking at youth development, specifically in Northeast El Paso, and worked with a whole host of different organizations and really interesting and exciting group of individuals up in Northeast to be able to identify how you could be able to provide programs for children, youth, and families in Northeast. And that program probably invested close to $2 million in about 2 years within a really exciting program. It actually helped establish the Boys and Girls Club up in Northeast El Paso, where there was none previously.
And one of the things that you're involved in now is the Plaza Theater project. Maybe we could explain what the Plaza Theater is.
The Plaza Theater is just an incredibly gorgeous theater. It's one of those theaters where people in town, when you hear conversation about it, people, the first thing they remember is they remember going as a youngster and seeing movies. They remember seeing plays. They remember going on a Saturday morning and having Uncle Roy Chapman on the stage of the theater entertaining them for the Saturday mornings. They remember the organ that used to play, and they would have sing-alongs that would really entertain a lot of the children. Couples remember going on first dates to the Plaza Theater and being really entertained. It was really a place where people were transported from their everyday life and just sort of an architecture of fantasy. It had a Spanish colonial revival style of architecture. In the auditorium, there was a blue ceiling. There were twinkle lights on the ceiling that gave you the real appearance that you were outdoors. And there was a machine that would project clouds onto the ceiling. And so when you're sitting watching a show, you would look up and you'd see stars that were out, you would see clouds passing by, and it really gave you the feeling and the illusion that you were really outdoors watching a show, whatever that show was.
When was the theater built? What's the history of it?
It was, groundbreaking was in August of 1929, just a couple of months before the Great Depression was really begun. First show was on September 12th, 1930, and really hosted a wide variety of different programs from, in its early days, a lot of operatic productions were held on the stage of the theater. The Junior League used to have their annual Follies on the stage of the theater. All kinds of movie stars and stage film actors appeared on the stage. People like John Wayne, Ethel Barrymore, Tallulah Bankhead, Mae West. The story goes with Mae West, when she appeared at the theater, she required that her dressing room be painted pink. And there's a dressing room that's still been painted pink at the Plaza Theater right now, and it's been preserved in perpetuity ever since.
Now, this is quite a bit different from the theaters that we might attend today, right? This is a place that had a variety of different activities.
It really was, and it is part of the natural evolution in some ways of theater history. About 120 years ago, theaters were really sort of bawdy places. They were sort of glorified saloons. You could imagine people sitting around playing blackjack or poker and then ordering a drink from the barkeeper. There would be somebody on stage, maybe the Can-Can Girl, something like that. And then there was a slow evolution really with the advent of moving pictures and the establishment of some of the first Nickelodeons, where theaters really started to gain sort of a different look and appearance. A lot of times, some of the earliest theaters, if you want to call it that, were really boxy square rooms where you would have lined up around the wall small little machines. There were little viewfinders, if you want to look at it that way, that a patron individually would look into and see a moving picture.
So they couldn't project.
Exactly.
Yet.
And then with evolution in technology, then there was an entrepreneurial soul one day who figured, aha, here's a plan. I can get more people into this room if I have one screen. And instead of being limited to about 15 small little individual viewfinders, I can now bring in about 40, 45 people, say, and they can all watch the same production at the same time and help increase my bottom line. And over time, these little boxy little rooms then moved into trying to be grander and grander places, because each one of the different owners of the theaters were trying to be able to see how they could outdo their competitor down the street. So they really wanted their venue to outclass the one that was right next door. And so you start having this whole natural evolution really from about 1900 to about 1930 or so, where each theater that was built was grander, more elaborate, more ornate. And if you look at the history of El Paso Street, the 1922 phone directory lists about 17 different theaters, with really the Plaza Theater being the last of the great movie houses that was built up and down that street. There were theaters that were built, names change over time, but the L&A Theater, built in the 1920s, the Capri Theater, which is now, you can still see the marquee and the facade of it, but it's right on the corner of Paisano and El Paso Street. It was a venue that Gypsy Rose Lee once appeared on the stage of the theater. So there's all this wonderful wealth of history up and down that entire region. The Plaza Theater was really the last of its kind, not only on El Paso Street and in El Paso, but really one of the last of its kind in the United States.
And by the time that the plaza opens, we're talking about sound pictures, right? The late 1920s soundtracks with them.
There was the whole evolution now. The best way that I can think of it is thinking of digital, the digital transformation in the way that we see movies nowadays. And there's that slow evolution to surround sound and to the digital packaging and formatting of movies. Well, it was sort of a similar kind of a revolution that was occurring in the late 20s and early 30s, moving from silent films into the talkies.
And going to the theater was a different experience than it is today. There was more involved than simply seeing a movie, right?
Right. In a lot of ways, it's still probably the same as it holds today. When one goes to the theater, it was a whole buildup of activities. You didn't just wake up one morning and decided that you were going to go to the theater necessarily. You would really start to think about it. You would coordinate with some of your friends, your family members, your loved ones, go out and have a nice dinner, enjoy yourselves, walk over to the theater, being thoroughly immersed in the whole experience, enjoy yourself, and then you would then leave at that point. We've heard so many wonderful stories of people that remember going to the Plaza Theater when they were younger, who would take the buses down, and they would stop right outside here at San Jacinto Plaza, and then they would walk around the corner, and they would then go and enjoy the experience. Many parents who remember dropping their children off on Saturday mornings because it was the most affordable daycare for its time. Sure. They could drop their child off at the Plaza Theater and go shopping at the White House department store or the Popular Dry Goods. And know that within 3 hours they could get all their shopping done and then come back, pick up their child, and go right back home.
Sure. And you saw more than just a movie, right? You would see things like newsreels.
Exactly.
You mentioned some of the entertainment that they had there as well. What was the function of the organ?
The organ really was a way to be able to help enhance the entire experience. The Mighty Wurlitzer organ could replicate all of the sounds of an orchestra. And so it was a really affordable way to have an orchestra there, but it also gave all the sound and the fury of an instrument that could really let out a good scream and really entertain people. There were stories that we've heard of all kinds of sing-alongs where they would entertain children before and after shows. They would also not only play some of the loud, grandiose music, but even just really provide some soft, subtle music to really entertain patrons before and after shows. It was really an integral part of the entire experience of when you went to the theater.
Sure. We mentioned a few of the people that were at the Plaza Theater at one time or another. What famous personalities do we have there?
All kinds of people, really, from John Wayne, Uncle Roy, Roy Chapman had mentioned me. He was the MC who introduced John Wayne and was wanting to be able to clarify, how do I refer to you? Is it Mr. Wayne? Do I call you John Wayne? And he just looked him in the eye and said, you call me Duke. And he said, yes, sir, I will call you Duke. Other people like Mae West, who appeared on the stage of the theater. I mentioned the dressing room that was painted pink. But we were reading in the newspaper an account that held that her voice was so soft when she appeared at the theater that they had to turn the air conditioning unit off so that everybody in the room could hear her. And apparently her vision wasn't as good. And maybe a lot of that had to do with all the lights concentrated on her when she came on stage. And so they had to nail down a 2x4 onto the floor of the theater, and she used that, and she would use her foot to tell her exactly where she needed to be.
The edge, sure.
Exactly. There's another story of Sally Rand, who appeared at the Plaza Theater. She was the famous fan dancer, and she performed her act during the 50s, I believe. And there was a story, she didn't use the fan, but she used sort of a clear see-through ball that she used to be able to perform her dance. And there's a story of one of the operators of the lights who accidentally flashed the wrong light. It was a clear see-through light. And she used to perform al natural. And stories of lots of cat calls and her yelling at the operator, to get him to fix the problem. But all kinds of wonderful stories of different celebrities that appeared at the theater. Jimmy Stewart, and one of the most notable ones was Rita Moreno, who really was the catalyst of being able to raise the last bit of money when the theater was in danger of being destroyed.
And were there any particular events that took place at the theater? Was it used for other things besides performances at all?
Well, there was a number of different community events. The Downtown Lions Club used to have an event where they would have kids and anybody that wanted to be able to come in and watch a show. The price of admission was an item of canned food. And that was a way then for them to be able to have additional cans to then distribute to some of the different homeless shelters within the community. At one point in the 1970s, the theater also housed a collection from the El Paso County Historical Society. There was a sandwich shop within the theater, and that was a whole period of transition really when the owners of the theater sold the property in the early 1970s. And so there was a whole period of trying to define exactly how the theater could be used. And so it really took on a lot of different purposes. There was a sandwich shop inside there to attract people to come in, be able to sit down and have something to eat. The County Historical Society had a small collection that was held in there. It was sort of a visitor center to kind of welcome and orient people where to go and what to see when they were in the downtown area.
So when it stopped functioning as a theater, it still, for years, served other functions?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what's the origins of the restoration project? How does that come about?
Sure. It's really been something that people have been focusing on for about 30 years, really since that change in ownership in the 1970s. There's always been a concerted effort to be able to see how something can be done at the Plaza Theater, but there never seems like nothing has ever really happened, it seems like. In the mid-1980s, there was a plan to be able to demolish the Plaza Theater, and that was really when the whole program with Rita Moreno came about. The Plaza Theater was going to be turned into a parking lot in November of 1986, and our board really started to jump onto that whole effort, hearing a lot of the outrage within the community about hearing that a building like this could be demolished and torn down. And so we immediately began negotiating with the owners, and they gave us 2 months to be able to raise $1 million. And it was really, I think, sort of a testament to the generosity of the people in El Paso, but also the fact that so many people feel strongly about trying to see something happen with the Plaza Theater, that $1 million was raised in those 2 months. And it culminated really with Rita Moreno performing a production on the stage of the Plaza Theater. So at that point, then the foundation placed a new roof on the theater because the roof was badly damaged. A lot of water had entered the building. There's water damage in a lot of areas. And then donated the building to the city of El Paso so that we could jointly work together and see how we could be able to see the theater restored once again. And there's been a couple of different times during the 1990s when there's been talk or some preliminary planning to be able to see how the theater could be restored, but nothing ever seemed to pan out. And so really what we're doing right now is trying to see, well, how can we really try to look at, study how the theater could be made viable, how it could be an operating part of the way that the community would want to be able to see the theater integrated back again into the day-to-day activities. And then let's see how we can get that done. Let's go ahead and do it.
You mentioned some water damage. What condition is the building in generally?
Generally, it's in really good condition. The nice thing about it is most everything that you see within the building, our experts that we've been working with say that most of that is really quite cosmetic. The two things that can really damage a building are water and animals. And when I speak of animals, I think of like rats, pigeons, all kinds of little creepy crawly things. And so the water can really deteriorate a building, but we're also really blessed in this area that it's a really dry climate. And so we don't have a lot of precipitation. We don't have a lot of that kind of damage where in places further north or where there might be a lot more humidity. Water has really damaged a lot of different historic buildings to the point where they're virtually unrecognizable or they cannot be salvaged at all.
So it's probably better preserved than many of the other theaters from that period.
Exactly. We've heard stories of other theaters across the United States where the Plaza Theater had stars that you could see. There's other buildings that never intended for there to be stars, and you look up at night and there really are stars because there's no roof. The roof is caved in.
What kinds of things have been done over the years to keep it up? You mentioned the roof, for example. Has there been periodic maintenance on it, or has it been pretty much abandoned?
it's been pretty much abandoned for all practical purposes for about 15 years. A barricade was erected at the very front of the theater to be able to restrict access in and out when it changed title to the city of El Paso. And that was really just based upon the fact that there wasn't a concerted plan to be able to do something with the theater, and they wanted to be able to really restrict access in and out of the building. There was also a problem with homeless people sleeping underneath the marquee of the theater and lighting fires, and so it was a fire hazard. And so that barricade is really one of the only identifiable pieces, that's really been done, any kind of work in the front of the theater. But for all practical purposes, when it was closed, it was closed. They pretty much locked the door and walked out.
Now, very recently, there's been some renewed interest in all of that. What's been happening lately?
Sure. It's really kind of exciting. Most of the work that's really been undergone lately is trying to be able to figure out, in the absence of a concerted plan to do something with the theater, we were constantly being approached by individuals in the community about how can we really develop a program so that the theater could be reused once again. 2.5 years ago, the El Paso Community Foundation secured a lease from the city of El Paso to go ahead and start to study that very question. We retained a group of professionals, some architects, to be able to start to look at structurally what the building, what the condition of the building was in, to be able to start to look at what kinds of operational considerations would need to be looked at as far as the operations and usage of the theater, and how then could we be able to go out and actually execute a plan of that nature. We actually partnered with the El Paso Community College, and the college was very much interested in trying to see how the college could fit in some capacity in either the operations or the usage of the theater. And it was actually Dr. Cecilia Cervantes who really helped develop a committee to be able to bring them together to start to study that very question. We then started to then expand upon that plan that they had created to then start to look at what kinds of things beyond educational purposes and also performing arts and artistic purposes would need to be done to be able to make the venue a viable one. And so we brought in a number of different consultants to be able to start to look at that very question. At the same time, one of the exciting features, the Community Foundation acquired about a year ago the annex building at the very front of the Plaza Theater. Our architects really felt that that acquisition was very much the make or break element of the entire project. And the acquisition of that property allows us to then control that land use and then be able to integrate 3 different elements in there, which I think will be really exciting for the general public. One is the creation of a 2-story restaurant at the very front of the theater. Then the creation of a 250-seat young people's theater in that same general space that will then be able to be used for all kinds of children's programming, educational programming, but specifically designed for young people and for children. And then a conversion of the roof where the annex building is to be able to create sort of either an overflow area for the restaurant or a space for private receptions, quinceañeras, weddings. But then the annex property then helps create sort of a gathering place for all kinds of individuals to be able to come to the downtown area. Because it's not just necessarily just a restoration of the Plaza Theater. It's using the Plaza Theater in the context of everything else that's around it. There's the art museum just next door. There's the history museum, which is coming downtown. There's the Insight Science Museum, the downtown library, which is being expanded. There's now the Holocaust Museum, which is coming to the downtown area. I mean, there's all this momentum. And so it's really trying to look at how does the Plaza Theater fit within the greater context of what's going on downtown.
And how will we go about having these projects built? How will we go about getting that work completed?
It's sort of a how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. What we're really trying to look at right now is really trying to refine exactly what it would take to be able to restore the theater. And so the architects, Martinez and Johnson, are really trying to be able to figure out what do you need to do to restore the building and really refine beyond just feasibility. We know that the project is feasible, it's realistic, it's doable. We've also been told that the operations of the theater are feasible, it's realistic. It doesn't require an operating subsidy to be able to ensure that it's continually in the black, so to speak. So, the next question is, well, what do we need to do to be able to execute that plan? And that's one of the central questions that they're looking at. We've also developed an agreement in principle with the city of El Paso, which owns the theater, to start to explore how can we be able to participate jointly in the restoration of the Plaza Theater. Our board of directors has already signed off on trying to commit $12 million towards the restoration of the theater. And so we want to then be able to then work with all kinds of community individuals, organizations, to be able to see how we can jointly be able to restore the theater. And we would then want to be able to work with the city of El Paso to really see this as a public and private partnership.
Any idea on the timetable, what kind of time we're looking at here?
Well, that's actually, it's interesting. Within the last month or so, we now have a date that we can hang our hat on. The architects tell us that October 1st, 2004 should be opening night for the Plaza Theater. Really looking at trying to nail down some of those initial questions right now and potentially having a groundbreaking ceremony to really start to do some of that capital work sometime next year. So it's really an exciting time to really start to see how this whole plan is coming together. There's a lot of work that needs to be ironed out between now and then, but it's one of those kinds of things that I think the community wants to see happen. And now that we actually have a date that we can look towards, then we can start to work from that.
Great. Well, we certainly want to thank you for telling us all about the project today and inviting us to these beautiful facilities here in the Cortez building. We look forward to all of these changes taking place, and we look forward to 2004, possibly visiting the Plaza Theater. Thank you, Roman.
Get your
for coming
tickets
here
now.
Today. Thank you. And we want to thank all of you as well for joining us today on Along the Rio Grande, and we hope to see you on our next program.